You're listening to the Fringianity Underground podcast. Fringe topics with a Christian point of view. Now here's your host, Leo Rutledge. Today's episode is titled Planned Satanhood. Due to the content of some of the stuff addressed in this show, you may want to turn it off if you have a weak stomach in dealing with babies and the massacre of babies by Planned Parenthood. With that, let's begin the show.
The horrific undercover footage shows the video makers posing as prospective buyers of fetal tissue. They are talking with top-level Planned Parenthood executives about buying aborted body parts. The videos allege that Planned Parenthood sold them for profit, a violation of federal law. Released this past summer, the footage sparked outrage among many people across the country.
It was amazing that they were able to capture the very gruesomeness of these procedures.
A Houston grand jury, however, now says that Planned Parenthood did not violate the law, but that the makers of the video did. It has charged two of them with tampering with a government record, which is a felony, and has not released any other details. One of those charged, David Daleidan, responded to the indictments by saying that he used the same undercover techniques as investigative journalists and that he followed the law. Daleidan is the founder of the Center for Medical Progress, which made the videos. The governor of Texas says the indictments will not affect the state's investigation of the videos. Other states are investigating Planned Parenthood as well. And Southern Baptist leader Russell Moore is calling the indictments complete corruption. He notes that one of the prosecutors in the Harris County District Attorney's Office has been a Planned Parenthood board member since 2013.
Ephesians 5 don't cover evil deeds, expose them. But you look at social reform movements from the 19th and 20th centuries, and every single one of them used disturbing imagery to convey truths that couldn't be conveyed with words alone. And abortion is no different. Nobody you know in your churches would go to a lecture on the Vietnam War and be shocked to see images of naked children running from a village that's just been napalmed. That's expected. It's only on the abortion issue people say, hands off, you can't show the pictures. And when we're dealing with a culture that thinks right and wrong are preference issues, like choosing chocolate ice cream over vanilla, if you aren't showing images to restore a moral equilibrium, at least awaken a little bit their sense of moral intuition, I think you're fighting a huge uphill battle. But when we show those pictures, we need to do it with the grace and with pointing people to Jesus, who's the solution to their post-abortion guilt.
This offends us. But before we get offended at this idea, remember that when God showed us how serious our sin was, he did it with the brutality of the cross. And it happened in public. And when we talk about the cross, we're talking about a brutal event that took place where the Son of God hung and died and was brutally murdered on a cross. And it was done as a public display. And it's that God used to show us the picture and the image of how serious our sin is. So if you get offended by the idea of showing people images of abortion, the correction doesn't need to come with the people who are showing the images. You need to re-educate your conscience.
It is great to have you here. This is the first time we've met. Have you met before, Russell?
No, we haven't, till just now.
It is good. I've thought about what to ask you. If I met this guy that did these videos, what would I ask you? And the first thing is, how are you doing? I mean, there's a lot of pressure coming on you, even a lawsuit that I heard about last couple of weeks. Just how are you doing personally with that kind of national pressure?
Sure. Well, thank you guys for letting me be here with all you this morning. I'm doing pretty good. You know, I am very tired most of the time. There's a lot of mental processing and even kind of spiritual processing. I'm doing a lot, every day to a very high degree. But other than that, I feel good. It's by the grace of God that that's possible. So.
Well, we need to keep praying for you, that's for sure, and
Please
those
do.
who have helped you. So,
Now, David, one of the over the past several years, it seemed over the past year, every week for a sustained season of time, there would be another video that Center for Medical Progress would put out. I know this took a long time to put together, but I'm interested in, you obviously had a burden to see the reality of the abortion industry to be seen and brought to light. Why are you pro-life? What shaped you?
Sure. So I myself am actually the child of a crisis pregnancy situation. My parents got pregnant with me their junior year of college. They gave birth to me their senior year and got married after graduation. And, I grew up in a home that was kind of nominally or culturally Catholic, but not necessarily super practicing hardcore. But I always grew up with the sense really strongly that just from that experience that, sometimes people get pregnant and have kids in less than totally perfect situations or less than perfectly planned situations, and that ultimately there's nothing wrong with that and there's nothing shameful about that, because now is always a good time to welcome a new little person into the world. And so that was really formative for me in terms of just how we treat people and how we respect people. So.
David, let me ask you this question. When you're thinking and strategizing about how to do this, you have, two polarized camps in this country. How do you think through the best way to illustrate to a world that may not agree with you in a pro-life context? How did you come to that strategy to say, okay, let's do a series of videos, let's get them on tape, let's hear what they believe and what they espouse? How'd you come up with that strategy?
Definitely. I think part of the power of the videos that CMP has put out so far, and part of the power of the whole baby body parts issue, is that it speaks to really core human values and American values that a lot of people share, regardless of your political persuasions or regardless of your level of political engagement or even kind of philosophical engagement with issues like abortion or related issues. Because at the heart of the whole baby parts trafficking issue, there's this really cruel paradox that I can never get over, and it's part of what drove me to do a really specific study on it for 2.5 years. And it's the fact that unborn children, the human fetus, their humanity is not considered to be equal enough to our own in order to be completely protected by law, in order to be completely protected from being killed by abortion. But at the same time, it's precisely that equal humanity and humanity that is identical to our own that makes them so valuable for scientific experimentation and makes Planned Parenthood and researchers and their allies hunt after their body parts like buried treasure. And so I think that contradiction throws the whole world of legalized abortion in America into really stark light, and it highlights that contrast between what some of our deepest values are about human dignity and human equality as people and as Americans. And so I think it taps into a moral sense that most people have, even if they don't consider themselves pro-life or don't consider themselves pro-choice or haven't really thought about abortion in a very serious, conscious way. I think that these videos are tapping into something very deep and very human.
One of the things that some people have criticized you for is, obviously you had to go undercover, you had to pretend to be buyers of these parts. And so some would say, well, you're lying in order to do that. And so are you kind of making morality relative here by using lying and deception in order to do that. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think that undercover work is actually fundamentally different from lying, because the purpose of undercover work is actually to serve the truth and to bring the truth to greater clarity and to communicate the truth more strongly. And certainly in normal everyday life, we don't always communicate the truth by a simple kind of 1 = 1 mathematical sort of equation way of speaking. We often use poetry and metaphor and acting and even pretext in order to communicate a really important truth in a more clear way. Our Lord did that in the Gospels with the parables. It's often done throughout the Holy Scriptures. And so I see undercover work in that same sort of vein, as a creative way of communication and speaking that is at the service of the truth.
Let me ask you this. When you look at a show like 2020 or 60 Minutes, they seem to applaud undercover work. You know, it's a good thing to go discover somebody doing something that's reprehensible. Why do you think there's a double standard in this case, that they think your work doesn't rise to that level when you're really exposing truth?
Well, I think it's because, as even Bernie Sanders is starting to realize, Planned Parenthood is part of the establishment, part of the secular progressive establishment, and they don't like that they got caught.
Now, when you're doing this, you're undercover for a relatively long period of time. How do you keep yourself together psychologically and in terms of your own conscience? I mean, one of the most shocking things, I think, to most people watching the videos is the casual atmosphere of sitting and eating salads, talking about livers and hearts and crushing above and crushing below. So what would you do to protect yourself and to prepare yourself for these encounters?
Definitely. I don't think that it's possible, and certainly for me it wasn't possible to do that kind of work without a firm reliance on the grace of God and without going into these situations and going into the entire undercover project with a really strong intention that this is being done out of love. Even in the parts of it that are very serious and very grave, at the end of the day, all of it is done out of love. And so when you're in a situation interacting with, say, a late-term abortion doctor who truly does things that are monstrous, the acts and the deeds that they commit are absolutely monstrous, but they're still a human being. That individual who's doing monstrous things is still a human being made in the image and likeness of God, with a soul, with an eternal soul that will exist forever and is meant to be with him forever. And so what you have to do is, from that place of love, you have to find something about their humanity that you can still relate to and that you can still latch onto. And for me, that was always the fact that the doctors themselves realize pretty clearly that they're killing people. They see the humanity of the unborn baby up close and personal every day, and they have to carry the burden of the guilt and the conflict with them of engaging with that every day. And so in that sense, they and I actually, they share that with us, that they have grieved over dead baby parts the same way that we have. And so there is, I think, on a certain spiritual level, there is something really powerful about that connection, and that may be the door through which God's grace can enter some